Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Alex, and we're going to be doing a deep dive into the upcoming season, specifically as far as win totals, what's going to happen between the draft, what happened in free agency, NFL divisions. We're going to be talking about all that, so make sure you stick around. We're also going to be getting into some team unders, teams that we're selling, and we're going to be getting to some team overs, teams that we're buying. So how was our 2024 season? How was last season? It was really good. We had some great reads. We made some good calls. We went 5-1 on win totals. As far as our numbers go, invested $2,910. That was total. As far as winnings, we had 2241. Obviously, we have to take out the losses as well. That was $600. So a total profit of $1,641. I put that into my ROI calculator, and it was right around 57%. So really good. Obviously, it's not going to happen every year. There will be some variance year over year, but specifically, what did we have? We had the Jags under 8.5 wins. They ended up at 4. We had the Saints under 7.5 wins. They ended up at 5. I was really high in the Commanders. I had them over 6.5 wins. They finished at 12. Cowboys under 10.5. They finished 7. Cardinals over 6.5. They finished at 8. And the one team that we did not have a correct read on, or that just overperformed, that team was going to be the Bills. They were lined at 10.5. Obviously, we know they had a really good season and finished at 13 wins early on in the season. It wasn't looking too great for them. I thought it was looking good, and then they just turned on the Jets. So, average those, it was about average of 3.5 wins as far as taking those winners go. We were correct by about 3.5 wins. So it's not like, many of these we barely squeaked over. We had pretty solid reads, and I would consider that a very successful season. I did that. Why? Because certain things that we're looking at, free agency grades, we're looking at NFL draft picks, we're looking at divisions, and we're going to get to those in just a second. So starting off, why NFL win totals? Why would you want to give your money out for 6, 7, 8 months? Well, let me tell you why. Reason why I prefer win totals and have had good success week to week basis when it comes to handicapping games and picking spreads. It's tough. It's really tough. A lot of things come as far as injuries, motivation, the weather sometimes. It's just so unpredictable. Not saying you can't be good at it. However, just a few bounces here and a few bounces there really seem to dictate a lot. So as far as getting ahead of those spreads, but the nice thing about win totals is typically they should even off more or less. So you get lucky one week, you get unlucky one week. Over the course of 17 games, I think it's going to be pretty accurate and pretty true. You have a larger sample size as far as actually hitting your bet and your projection, rather than just putting it on, a full game or a half. Something like that, in my opinion, is going to have a bit higher of volatility. One other thing I do want to mention specifically as far as win totals go is that you're going to get the best price earlier on in the season, as these are bet after the draft and through the summer, and pretty much like August, end of August comes, all that value has kind of been extracted, and those numbers are going to be really sharp where they should be. So, for example, I got some good numbers already, and those numbers have changed from, I got in, let's say 10.5, under 10.5, it's now 9.5. So there is some value to be had earlier in the season if you do not mind waiting. So we're going to talk about some factors that influence my decisions. Why did I pick those teams last year? Well, I do want to talk about a couple of those. So first and foremost, I want to drill the concept that the NFL teams and marketplace is just like a stock exchange. And what do they say in stocks and day trading, anything like that? Just a general, market advice. You want to buy low and sell high. that's it. There's going to be a couple of times where that doesn't fit, and I have a team specifically that I am thinking of, but more often than not, we're going to buy low and sell high. Now, why do I say that? There's so much parity in the NFL year after year. Roster changes, they're about 35, 30, even sometimes 40% different teams than they were last year. GMs get fired, coaches get fired. Now compare this to something like the NBA. I'm not saying the NBA doesn't have parity, but typically you're going to get a group of superstars or a really solid 5-man team. You're going to get maybe 2 or 3 of those guys, and they don't move for a long time. Think of the Warriors. You got Steph Curry, you got Clay, and they had that core for a long time, and they were consistently a good team. Now, for NFL, yeah, you're going to have teams that are good teams, like the Chiefs. They've been very good for a while. Same thing with the Eagles. But as a general principle, more often than not, there is going to be more parity in the NFL. So it's not all that wise to pick a team that's not going to be so hot this year. Let's say the Browns, let's say the Saints, Titans. And it's not typically a moneymaker to say, man, oh, I know that team sucks, I'm going to bet them under. And then look at a team like the Chiefs and Eagles, who were just in the Super Bowl, and say, man, that team's so good, how they're surely going to be good again this year. Injuries is going to play a part of that. Luck is going to play a part of that. So there are certain things that we need to keep in mind and understand that from a pure value perspective, it is about the teams and how the teams are in paper and how they're coached and what position strengths and weaknesses they have. But just as important, if not more importantly, we need to look at where Vegas is pricing these teams, what the perception of these teams are. That's how we're going to be finding value, and that's how we're going to be making money. With that being said, we're going to jump into free agency now. What a team does in free agency is going to say a lot about their upcoming year. For example, the Commanders, who I was very high on coming into last year, they were a team that was viewed as a joke. They had bad ownership. They weren't good in a long while, so their public image was down. And all of a sudden, they spend a bunch of money in free agency, and they're making moves. They're getting guys like Bobby Wagner, Jeremy Chin, Austin Eckler, just to name a few. Obviously, there was, some more. And a lot of, not a lot, but some people were like, man, why are the Commanders doing this? They're a sucky team, and now they're wanting to compete. And sure enough, they did great. Same thing 2 years ago with the Houston Texans. Again, I had an over ticket on them at maybe 5.5 wins. And they went and got guys that helped them tremendously, some big names. We're going to start off with a team who had probably agreeably one of the worst free agencies, and that is the San Francisco 49ers. I'm going to be reading some blurbs from these different sites, so it's not me speaking eloquently, but me reading something that was already written up. It's quite staggering how much talent the 49ers lost this offseason. Deebo Samuel was traded, 2 offensive linemen departed, including starting guard Aaron Banks. Lots of talent in the interior defensive line was lost, with Javon Hargrave and Malik Collins departing. The edge rush was diminished, with Leonard Floyd signing elsewhere. The middle of the defense took an even bigger hit, with Dre Greenlaw and Talanoa Hufanga moving on to other teams. And if that wasn't enough, a starting cornerback was lost as well. So the 49ers added players to replace all of these departures, right? Well, no, not at all. San Francisco didn't add a single free agent who projects to be a starter. This has been a complete nightmare of an offseason for San Francisco. And for the grades, we have F, as well as a D. The Seahawks, notable signings, they got Sam Darnold, Cooper Kupp, notable departures, Geno Smith, DK Metcalf, and Tyler Lockett, among some others. I do want to chime in and say that Sam Darnold was propped up by a great Vikings team. They got great coaching, they got great weapons, they got a great offensive line. In my opinion, quarterback is one of the most reliant positions on others. So to put him in a situation in Seattle that lacks weapons and that lacks an offensive line, I don't think it's going to turn out so great. I was going to do some more recordings of bad free agency teams, but they're not really relevant, so I'll just go through a couple with you real quick. Saints, F, and C grades. Cowboys, F, D-, C-. Eagles, D+, and B+. So these teams just suck, straight up. No, we're just kidding. So we're going to get on to some teams that are a little bit better. Again, skip the deep dives this time. Bears and Vikings both lead out the top of free agency. Both of them have invested a lot into their offensive line, which I love to see. Other three teams that pretty much unanimously dominated were Commanders, Rams, and Broncos, all with grades with A's and B's across the board. Now that free agency is taken care of and we know exactly pretty much how next season's going to go, just kidding, we're going to look at some NFL 2025 draft picks. What do teams got? So I know some people won't, as far as betting goes, they want to see what's going to happen. Totally fine. I get you or some people may be very high or very low on some prospects. If a certain team gets a really good haul, yeah, you may want to bet them. And likewise, if a team takes Shedeur Sanders, you probably want to fade him. Jokes aside, the issue with that, though, is that when it comes, again, to a value proposition, you're going to have every single major outlet, whether it's ESPN, whether it's PFF, it doesn't really matter. Teams that have good drafts, you're going to hear about 2-3 teams that absolutely killed the draft. Now, the benefit of betting on win totals before the draft happens is that typically teams with a lot of picks or a lot of high picks are going to have good NFL drafts. And teams with very few picks, they're not going to gain as much talent. So I do think that there is an advantage to going a little bit blind, because after these teams have really good drafts or really bad drafts, Vegas will adjust the lines. So you're not going to be really getting too much of an advantage. However, if you have done deep dives on each one of these prospects and have very strong opinions, sure, it may be wise to wait, because rookie classes do play a significant part in how a team performs. Teams that often are playoff teams and are high win total teams often have rookies that step up huge. Just look at the Rams this year. Jared Verse and Braden Fisk played a really good role for their team. Same thing with Puka the year before. So I think that having rookies step up is a huge way to get an advantage on those win totals. Looking at the actual teams, though, with some good drafts and bad drafts, we are going to start with two teams that have the highest amount of draft pick totals. That's going to be coming in at 11. That does not include having super high draft picks. I'm sure, more draft picks the better, but it's not like they have, a whole bunch of picks in the top 50 or 100. I would say it's probably average, but just as far as sheer volume goes, the Ravens and the 49ers both have 11 draft picks, so that is going to be something of note. As far as teams that actually have some serious capital play with, you're going to be looking at Chicago. They have 3 picks in the top 50. Seattle Seahawks are another good one. They have 5 draft picks in the top 100. They also have 10 total picks and 3 picks in the top 52. So right behind Chicago, and maybe even better than Chicago if you're counting total amount of picks. I think that they're dangerous. So what they lost in free agency, I think that they could definitely make up for in the draft. And for me, at least, it's kind of hard to step in front of these teams that are absolutely loaded on draft capital. Another good team, 3 kind of bottom feeder teams that may not be bottom feeders this season. Again, all about perception, but the Browns, the Patriots, and the Giants all have 5 picks in the top 104, 105, and 106 respectively. Out of those 3 teams, if I had to guess which one takes the biggest improvement, I would probably lean the Patriots just because I like Drake May, and they spent a lot of money in free agency. They overpaid for some guys, but they definitely do have a better team than they did last year. As far as teams that are not going to be drafting so hot, the worst team by far is the Vikings, kind of doing an opposite of free agency. They killed free agency, but as far as the draft goes, they only have 4 draft picks total. Not something you really want, so you probably will see them trading back. That's, not going to be a surprise. And another thing of note with the Vikings, their second pick isn't until pick 97, so definitely a long ways away. 2 other teams of mention, both these teams only have 5 draft pick totals. Again, you're likely going to see them trading down for some more picks, but those 2 teams include the Commanders and the Falcons. 3 more things I want to look at before we start getting into some actual numbers and some actual teams. I want to look at the divisional strength. I want to look at offensive lines, and I want to look at how teams ended the season. So I guess we'll start in that order reverse, if that makes any sense. So something else when I am grading teams coming into the season, I'm looking at how they ended the previous season. I think generally speaking, it's not a hard rule, but what I like to see is how a team played their last 4, 5, 6 games. And I think more often than not, that's going to carry into the next upcoming season. It doesn't always happen. For example, 1 year ago, I believe the Eagles ended up losing the last 5 out of their 6 games, and they look like a completely different team. Next year, they go on to win the Super Bowl. Again, it doesn't always happen. However, a team that would be a good example of this is when the Lions started the season 1-6, I believe, and then they ended up going on a tear to close off the season, won in Green Bay for the final game. And then since that exact moment, I think they've been one of the best covering teams against the spread. So teams that apply to this year, first one's going to be a positive one, and that is going to be the Carolina Panthers. Now, the Carolina Panthers, as far as the win-loss column, not looking so maybe great coming out of the bye week. They only had 2 wins out of 5 games, so they went 2-5 after their bye week in week 11. However, there is some important things that we can take away. They finished their season against the spread 7-2, which is a positive, and then they lost to the Chiefs by 3 points. They lost to the Bucks by 3 points. They kept it within a 1-score game within the Super Bowl Eagles. They won against a Cardinals team. They won against a Falcons team who was fighting for a playoff spot with the Bucks. So, it's a young team. I really like what Bryce Young has done over there, and it showed me that he could be, a long-term QB. And, specifically for him to be thrown in a situation where, a lot of guys don't come out of that hole that he dug maybe and the Panthers dug. So I definitely think that is a team on the rise. Opposite side of that, we're going to be looking at the 49ers. Now, the 49ers finished the season 1-7 straight up. Not a good look. It's really not a good look coming into the upcoming season. And as far as what they say about Super Bowl slump, there you go. Another point that I think is interesting to talk about are luck rankings. What was the luckiest team last year, and what was the unluckiest team last year? Surprisingly enough, it really, I guess, shouldn't be a surprise because it was kind of the storyline throughout the whole entire season, was the Kansas City Chiefs coming in at a huge rating of 5.2. I'm using team rankings here. 5.2 really doesn't mean anything. However, what you need to know, it is one of the luckiest seasons a team has had on record. The amount of games where they won on a call, other team messing up, coming down to the wire, missed field goal, whatever it may be, Kansas City got very lucky, and that showed in the Super Bowl. If you look at a predictive model of where they were as a team, they were right around like 7th to 9th as far as actual strength-wise goes when you look at the metrics, yet they finished technically second, becoming, second in the Super Bowl. Team right next to that is going to be the Minnesota Vikings. And yeah. As far as unlucky teams goes, the bottom 3 unluckiest teams are going to be Chicago, the Jets, and Jacksonville Jaguars as the unluckiest team, meaning you'd expect some sort of positive regression to the mean. Another factor that I take into consideration as far as ranking teams go is how is their offensive line. The offensive line is the engine of the car, so I don't care how cool your wheels are, what kind of vinyl wrap you just got in the car. If it doesn't run, you're not going to drive very far. So, I'm looking at teams that are very solid in the offensive line category. I'm not going to act like I know every single offensive lineman in the NFL. That's why I rely on my rankings for that. So, but more or less in the past couple years, teams that have bad offensive lines, I'm usually looking to fade because it's just of how important it is. If you don't have a good offense, you're not going to go very far. So following up with that, we have the best offensive lines, 2 rankings compiled. So we have the Broncos coming in at number 1, the Lions at number 2, Bucks, Ravens, Bills, Falcons, and Rams. As far as some of the worst offensive line units, Texans are the worst, followed by Seahawks, Patriots, Bengals, Giants, and Saints. Something else we want to be looking at is strength of schedule, specifically what divisions play, or I should say, who plays who, what divisions play each other. So I think we can go crazy with as far as divisional rankings. I think a lot of the middle ones don't really matter too much. However, I think we should all agree for the most part that the NFC North and the AFC West are the 2 most difficult divisions in football, specifically NFC North. You have 3 playoff teams. As far as the AFC West goes, you also have 3 playoff teams in the Chiefs, the Broncos, and the Chargers. As far as the last place divisions go, I would say clearly, in my opinion, it's going to be the AFC South. I would probably put 7th out of 8th as far as divisions go is going to be the NFC South. I really like the Bucks. However, the other 3 teams in the Panthers, the Saints, and the Falcons leave a lot to be desired. So we can see what division is playing what division. Long story short, if you're the NFC East, you are going to have a very tough time because you'll be going up against the NFC North and the AFC West. So when it comes to that, if I'm looking specifically at any sort of Eagles, Commanders, Giants, or Cowboys, I could only look the under. As far as another division that has a very difficult schedule is going to be the AFC South. Not only are they just a bad division in general, they have to play the AFC West as well as the NFC West, and you can make a case for the NFC West maybe being the 3rd best division behind the other 2 that I mentioned. So purely from a strength of schedule perspective, we would be playing the under win totals on AFC South potentially, as well as NFC East. We're looking at the one division that has a very juicy schedule is going to be the NFC West, and they play both South divisions, so NFC and AFC South. So that is really nice. So as far as, again, potential win totals, I would be looking to probably play overs on specific teams in the NFC West. That includes Rams, Cardinals, Seahawks, and 49ers. So finally, we're going to get into win totals. I know I said earlier, we're going to buy low and sell high. This team isn't necessarily that, but a team that I'm really high on coming into this upcoming season. And that team is the Denver Broncos. Yes, the Denver Broncos. A few reasons why. They had a really good free agency. They got Talanoa Hufanga. They got Drake Greenlaw. So they're nasty ND. Now, as far as their defense goes this past year, a lot of people would recognize the Eagles as the number one defense. Fine, but really, really close to them, coming in pretty much at second. If we're excluding the game in the playoffs where they got thrashed by the Bills. For majority of the season, they were second in opponent rush yards per play, second in opponent pass yards per play. So we know their defense is good. What about their offense? They rated as one of the best offensive line last year. Currently, as far as two rankings pulled up, they rank third and first respectively. Bo Nix did a really good job. You should when you have the best offensive line, but he grew throughout the year, and they didn't have too many weapons over there. So I expect them to have a really good year. I expect them to take down the AFC West, and you may be thinking to yourself, well, Alex, what about the Chiefs? What about Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid? So I guess it'll be a natural segue into the next team that we have, which will be the Chiefs, and I have them under 11.5 wins. Now you may be asking yourself, do you really want to do this? You do realize that since 2018, the Chiefs have had 11 wins every single year. They've been in 3 consecutive Super Bowls, and they've won 3 of them. If you go back a couple more years, you really want to go against the best QB, the best head coach in the NFL? Well, let me tell you what. Remember when I said buy low, sell high? We're going to be selling high on the Kansas City Chiefs. And part of the reason is their image. Exactly what I told you, I think we're getting a good price. I don't think this team, in my opinion, should be at 11.5 wins. I think it should be closer to 9.5, maybe 10.5. So the fact that we're getting 11.5 is huge. Now, again, you may say, well, they had 15 wins this past year. Well, I also did bring up the fact that they were the luckiest team by a wide margin, not only this season, but many of the previous current seasons. So this team is not what you think they are. The AFC West is competitive. You are going to have the Broncos and Chargers definitely giving the Chiefs a run for their money. Something else too, the Chiefs offensive line, not the best for a top tier team. We have one ranking coming in at number 26. Another ranking coming in at number 12. They lost all-pro guard Joe Thuney. But a big part of this ranking is going to be how well this tackle from the 49ers, Jalen Moore, can fill in at left tackle. So that's something to consider. Another thing too, as far as receivers go, they're losing DeAndre Hopkins, who is kind of a shell of his former self, nothing too big. Hollywood Brown, maybe not taking the strides he should be. And they do have Rashee Rice coming off of his injury. Also, as far as free agency, some notable losses go. They lost Justin Reed, Tershawn Wharton as well. So, again, I don't think the Chiefs are a bad team per se, but we got to keep in mind they were one of the luckiest teams in the league last year and shouldn't have had 15 wins. So Patrick Mahomes did not play his best football this year, and he certainly did not look like the number one overall quarterback that he was ranked at. He's still very good, but he had some games this year which were just straight up bad. Another thing too, the past couple years, they may have had Patrick Mahomes, may have had Andy Reid. However, from a team perspective, this team, this upcoming year, are not those teams. when it comes to purely a price perspective, I just think 11.5 is high for this team. A team that really got exposed in the Super Bowl. So for that reason, we're going to be playing under the 11.5. Sticking with the unders for a second, we're going to go under 9.5 wins on the Cincinnati Bengals. I got it a few weeks ago at under 10.5, which I felt like was really good value. Now it's down to 9.5. I'd probably play it all the way down to 8.5. I think they're an 8.5 win team, maybe a 7.5 win team. Now, why do I say that? Do I not like Joe Burrow? Didn't you see that they re-signed T. Higgins and Jamar Chase? Well, that's exactly the problem. The problem is that you don't have an offensive line. You have one of the worst offensive lines in the league. The problem is you don't have a defense. You had a very bad defense last year. This team reminds me of the mid-2010s Lions, where they had a good quarterback. They had Calvin Johnson and Golden Tate. They're flashy where they need to be flashy, but the issue is the rest of the team, the offensive line and the defense. So you could have great weapons, and that's what's sexy, and that's what's gonna get you a spot on ESPN or whatever. But when it actually comes down to football, there's no way this team is a playoff team, in my opinion. Especially even more so now that their best defensive player in Trey Hendrickson is looking for a trade and doesn't look like we'll be back. They did go on a tear last year, which is kind of contradicting earlier what I said, and they finished the season with 5 wins in a row. But after we do a bit of digging, we can see that's maybe not as impressive as it originally was. They went against Dallas. I'm not a huge Dallas fan. By 1 score. They played the Titans, one of the worst teams in the league. They won by 10 points. They played Cleveland, one of the worst teams in the league. They won against Denver in overtime, and I watched that game live, and that was one of the most flukiest overtimes I've ever seen. They really had no business of winning, but fine. I'll give them credit where it's due, and they hung in with a good Broncos team. And the last one they won was against a Steelers team by 2 points, and that Steelers team had a late season collapse. So I don't really think that this Bengals team should be lined this high. And that's that. Back on a positive note, a team that I like as far as the over goes, again, it's kind of a buy low, kind of not. It's going to be the Detroit Lions. Don't call me a homer, because there is some reasoning and logic to this. The Lions had their defense historically decimated last year. With that being said, if you look at the metrics and the point differential, they still dominated and were, the top team in the league DVOA for a while. Obviously, those injuries piled up worse and worse, and it got bad to the end of the year, but they're getting their guys back. They signed DJ Reed in free agency. They're getting Hutchinson back. I just think this team is an elite team and is the top of the crop of the NFL. The other part of this is that the Commanders are a good team, and they got beat by the Commanders. So that kind of leaves a lasting impression on, the Lions aren't really as good as they are because they won a playoff game, and look at how well the NFC North is doing. They got to compete, and that's a fair complaint. The NFC North is a difficult division. However, I still think they win the division. So the current number is set at 10.5. However, it may just get down to 9.5. Under 10.5 right now is minus 150, which signals that this number could move. If it gets down to 9.5, I'm going to be very happy, because this Lions team that won 15 games last year without a defense, I think that they're a top 3 team in the league, and they should be priced a bit higher than this. It is currently at 10.5, but it is juiced to the under. So we'll keep an eye on that. I do like the Lions a lot to repeat their success. Also, as far as if you did want to play their division goes, it is plus money at plus 130. So in my opinion, if you're afraid of the strength of schedule, you're afraid of the division, I still think they come out on top in this division. Next team we're going to be taking a look at is the San Francisco 49ers. Can you guess which way I'm leaning? The San Francisco 49ers are currently lined at 10.5 wins. 10.5. So I think goes without saying, I'm on the under, and this may be one of my favorite plays, given the fact that they won 6 games last year. They had a really bad free agency, like consensus F grades all around. They got Brock Purdy as quarterback, and while I'm not a Purdy hater, I'm just saying it's going to be difficult for Purdy without having that supporting cast. All-pro left tackle Trent Williams was out with an injury last year, season ender, so that may be part of it, but he's going to be 37 years old starting the season and not having a full year essentially having played football. So I think there may be some regression there. The 49ers are a very good brand. They've been successful more or less the past couple of years, maybe minus last season. So, I'm just 10.5 is steep, and I think they may be closer to a 7.5 win team for me, especially in a very competitive NFC West where they're going to have to be battling the Cardinals and the Rams, and the Seahawks may even grab a game against them. So we're playing as one of our favorite plays, the San Francisco 49ers under 10.5. That's pretty much that as far as like super strong official plays. And then I have some teams pulled up here and just want to kind of give my quick rundown and analysis of each one real quick. It's not going to be as in depth, but starting off with the Cardinals, they're at 8.5 wins with the NFC West cakewalk schedule. I would probably go over with the Cardinals. I think that they could be a 9 to 10 win team. I think they're gonna be chasing the Rams. Me being lower on the 49ers helps here. And then, like I said, they have a very cakewalk schedule. They play both the NFC South and the AFC South, so I think they could rack up some easy wins. As far as the Panthers go, they're at 6.5 wins. I would probably take the over. I think that after Bryce Young showing that he can play QB, they threw a lot of money at people in free agency. I think like the Panthers are probably the definition of like an average team. So I see like 8 wins all day, 7 to 8 wins. I don't feel super strong, obviously, about it, but I think that there's a decent chance that they finish second, right behind, maybe not right behind, but behind the Bucs in the NFC South. Cowboys, under 7.5 wins for the Cowboys. They have a brutal schedule this year. I am not a Dak Prescott fan. They hired Schottenheimer as their head coach, which was kind of questionable. They have maybe somewhat of a high brand image as far as, historically being seen as America's team and prestigious, but I think that 7.5 wins is a bit high, and if I had to play it, it would be on the under. Texans at 9.5 wins. I really like this Texans defense. However, I like CJ Stroud too. But unfortunately, when you don't have an offensive line, it's very difficult. And as of now, the Texans are pretty much consensus bottom offensive line. It'll be interesting to see what they do at the draft. That still is a projection nevertheless. They have a very difficult schedule in playing both the AFC and the NFC West. So because of their offensive line, I could only look to the under here. As far as next team up, the Rams. The Rams are over 9.5 wins. That is juiced minus 145 to the over. But I do agree with it, and I would lay that price. I honestly think they are 10.5, maybe even an 11.5 win team. Considering their schedule, Stafford is still a really good quarterback. They have good weapons there. I don't think that loss of Cooper Kupp hurts as bad because Kupp honestly was a shell of his former self. They have some really good young defensive pieces, and they played the Eagles as the closest of any other NFC team in, or just team in the playoffs in general. So I think the Rams are going to be really good. Another thing about the Rams is that win total wise, they've done well the past 2 seasons, despite having both very rough starts, not only this past year, but a year before that. So I think, if they could have a better start to the season, I could easily see them flying over this number. New Orleans Saints, 6.5 wins. It is juiced heavily to the under at -145, so I think the value is gone, but I think the Saints are going to be one of the worst teams in the NFL this upcoming season. Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 9.5 wins. I am on the over 9.5. I think that they have a really good squad that slept on. They have a really good offensive line. Baker Mayfield's good. They have Vita Vea. They have a good defense. So I like them to get over 9.5, and even more, I like them to win the division at plus money at plus 110. Penix doesn't scare me. The Saints don't scare me. The Panthers, I think, are going to be a little bit better and could contend with them, but I still think they're another year off. So I think the Bucs at plus money for that division is a very good play. So that was it. Thank you guys for listening, whoever is listening, and let me know what you guys think. What do you agree with? What don't you agree with? Let me know who you got.